raise a family. They have some of the same opportunities that me and my wife.
You agreed that we need to see them as a terrorist organization.
On a private cloud server, yes or no?
To love country, to love God, and to try to do the right thing.
Worked for the nation and the interests of the people.
Welcome back to the Fresh Freedom Podcast, your podcast with freedom-loving freshman members of Congress. I'm Eric Burleson from Missouri, and I'm joined today by Representatives Josh Burkeen from Oklahoma, Andy Ogles from Tennessee, and our special guest is Russ Vought from the Center for Renewing America. So thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And we got to meet you, I think, before we were sworn in. We got to back in November, right after the election, and so it was really neat for me because I remember seeing you on TV. You were a fighter for the Trump administration.
Well, thanks. I mean, we had a great time working for President Trump, and it's also fun to see the new freshmen that come in and are ready to take the world by fire, and to see what you guys have already accomplished. So it's fun to get to know you, and certainly to be on your podcast.
So tell us a little bit how your journey to get to this place. What was your...
Well, I spent 12 years on the Hill, came from Wheaton College, worked in majored in political science, spent 12 years on the Hill, generally working for members like you, those in the fight. And then I wanted to take what I had learned and share it with the grassroots, because I felt that you could have more of an impact trying to get one or two members to vote the right way if you could take that kind of high information and turn it around. And there's this view that grassroots aren't smart enough for that, and I find that to be totally untrue and slanderous. And I did that for 6 years, doing grassroots organizing as a policy person. President Trump gets elected, and then I went to work at Office of Management and Budget, and I was always a budget guy. And next thing you know, I'm getting nominated for deputy, and over time the director position. And it was a great chance to see the executive branch, get a feel for what must be done to save the country. And then, leaving, we thought we had a huge agenda for the second term, but there was also things that needed to happen on the outside. Things that you needed a new institution to make sure that the corrective that I think 2016 was to the powers that be here in Washington, D.C., don't have a chance to go back to the way business as usual occurred. You all have kind of taken the mantle and done an incredible job at that in the first few months, but we need more of that, and that's what our center attempts to do.
So Russ, a lot of people watching this, they'll be like, OMB, what's OMB? And so, for those of us that do know, it's like, well, that's a big deal. Can you break down what you did as Trump giving you that opportunity to represent him, and how big of a field of view that you had?
So the Office of Management and Budget is what OMB stands for. I think it's easier to tell people it's the budget office. But it's all budget issues. You can kind of turn anyone's funding on or off. It's all regulations, anything that's government-wide execution. So the wall, you have Department of Homeland Security, Department of Defense, that's all coming through Office of Management and Budget. But really what is set up is the statutory tools for a president, if he knows how to use it, to be able to deal with the deep state or the administrative state. And that's something that the Trump administration was increasingly learning how to do. And, we were the tip of the spear in that sense, because, if we know something's happening,
right,
we can turn it off.
So for every new rule you want to propose, bureaucracy, eliminate 2.
That was one of them, right? And we averaged about 5 or 6.
Explain that. You average about 5 or 6.
So the president came into office and said, I'm going to have a 2-for-1 for any regulatory agenda that someone needs to do, because it's, Congress passes and says you got to do a regulation. We're going to repeal 2 that are part of our deregulatory agenda. And we consistently just overachieved on that front, because the president loved to do deregulatory policy. He'd ask you, did you get rid of those regulations causing the washing machines to take forever, or the dishwasher to take forever, and
it's the multiple flushes on the low flow toilet.
And I would just think to myself, how does he know so much about the cycles of a dishwasher? And yet I'm thinking to myself, I haven't. It does take a lot longer than it did growing up. So he was very passionate about that agenda. And those were all things that we were facilitating and pushing and prodding the agencies to do.
And most people don't realize that a lot of these decisions are being made not by Congress on these rules. These are decisions that somebody sitting in a cubicle, unelected, is making a decision. And
Well, this is the problem, right? And we think about the Constitution, Article 1, Article 2, the President, and the reality is that Congress has ceded its lawmaking authority, made your job less interesting, made the executive branch too interesting in some respects. But, one of the things I would deal with, and I don't think we've got anyone from some of the corn states here, but ethanol would consume so much of our time, an issue like that, where the Congress just basically says, hey, you guys go figure it out, hit the right blend. And you'd have all of this, this policy legislating behind closed doors, and no one would ever know it. And it's not transparent. It's not on the floor of the House and the Senate. It's not democratic, other than the president being elected for sure. But that's something that I think we've got to get a handle of if we're ever going to save the country from what I think is the central threat, which is a woke and weaponized administrative state that has this power. And it really is a congressional imperial Congress type structure. The rank and file don't have the power, but the committee barons do. The leadership does. And that's why I think, some of the things that you've been doing to arrest control from these must-pass bills and force fights on the House floor have been so critical.
And I know I'm peppering with questions, but I know the Freedom Caucus knows how invaluable you've been. Even the term woke and weaponized is something that has got your insignia next to it. Many of us.
So is that like you coined that phrase? Can you take credit for that?
Well, I'm not in the business of taking credit, but it's something that
we'll give you credit.
Center for Renewed America has had which you had, has had a huge input in some of the numbers that we've been utilizing in the Freedom Caucus, and you're kind of a rock star among this group of us. And I was struck at the head of the year with your letter. Your letter started off with something that a lot of people don't do, and they're crunching numbers. You actually brought for Center for Renewed America a biblical admonition, which you actually talked about. I think it's 1 Samuel, but you quoted a scripture where it's Samuel coming to the people of Israel and saying, "You want a king." But let me tell you, as I've prayed about this and what the Lord's spoken to me, what's spoken to my heart, you get a king, he's going to take the best of your crops, he's going to take the best of your produce, he's going to take your children, the best of everything. It's just really what you want. You need to know what you're going into. And you ascribe that and say that government, it's almost like what Washington said, it's not reason, it's not eloquence, it's force. Like it's either a dangerous servant or a fearful master. Government is likened unto that. And so I thought that was really great that you took your organization and brought forth a biblical admonition. And coming from Wheaton College, I think you probably have a faith element to you.
No, we do. And we think, one of our main three correctives that the right, and as a result the nation has lost, and this gets into 2016, is we've been too secular, too imperialistic, and too economic. And as a result, we've been really off on a lot of different things and have not been able to have a coherent strategy and a coherent worldview about what it means to be a nation. So we are looking for opportunities. When's the last time in a political debate you heard actual scripture being talked about? So we're always looking for data, for points of emphasis on that. But really, in terms of the budget that you mentioned, our view is that the right has lost focus on this bureaucracy that's not just bad and wasteful and something we can't afford or the wrong role for the federal government. It's actively harmful to the people that you represent. Yeah. It's the Environmental Protection Agency that puts a 77-year-old Navy veteran in jail for 18 months because he built 4 ponds on his ranch to fight wildfire. It's a Department of Labor that shuts down a consignment business, or tries to, because she gives out free discounts for people that are volunteering at her shop so that they could have clothing for their kids. That's the Department of Labor. We're not even getting to the Department of Justice. So our view is that, and I saw this in the administration, if you go agency by agency, it's woke. The bureaucrats aren't just like big government FDRs, LBJ type liberals. They are trying to divide the country on the basis of a woke agenda. And they're also aimed at the American people in a way that is fundamentally harmful. And so we've tried to get people's attention to say the only way you're going to deal with that is to defund it. And so there's a lot of things that we could do to get our fiscal house under control. In my view, we've got to do this. The most important thing is to defund that bureaucracy. And in doing so, we'll save the country fiscally. And that's really kind of been the drum that we've been beating for the last several months, really since December when we put that budget out.
Yeah, so, if you look back, there's no doubt that under the Trump administration, America was better off, whether it's foreign policy, whether it's domestic policy, whether it's the economy. I mean, just really across every metric, right? Compared to the Biden administration. It's an absolute disaster across the spectrum. When you looked at 24, regardless of the viewers or whatever their perspective is, I believe Trump will be the nominee. And I think he will win. Now, full disclosure, I've endorsed Trump. I'm one of his first endorsements in this next cycle. So I have that bias, I understand. But Trump wins. He calls you up and says, assuming hypothetically you would accept a position, I need you back at OMB. What are the 3 things that you have to do in the first 6 months to right the ship, to course correct, to save America?
Well, a lot of ifs in there, but I was I think his first former cabinet official to get out and re-endorse and endorse him heading into this race as well, and so I'm really supportive of what he's trying to do because I've seen up front at the Resolute desk his ability to break paradigms, which I think we need a lot more breaking of paradigms in where we are.
True.
So I'm all for that. I would say that the things that I think are most critical are to seize control of the administrative state as soon and earlier as possible, to make sure that you don't have these agencies that think that they're independent, that Congress has just said, hey, we don't really want the legislative authority, we're going to give it to you, but you don't actually work for the president. None of that's constitutional. None of that's reflected in that founding document, and we've got to bring that back in. That'll have a ton of implications, everything from economic policy to public health. But that's going to be something that you've got to do in those first several weeks.
I think there's a project I was listening to on a podcast that's called the 2025 Project, where the goal is to identify, who's if Trump gets elected, who's going to get axed and who do you replace him with?
I'm a part of that initiative. Heritage is running that, and they've asked me to partner with them. And I'm really taking my role is not necessarily to find people that are going to be picked for these. There are folks on that project that will do that. Largely, the new president will do that. But my view is that personnel is really important, but it's not everything. And that is, you could have the right person that doesn't know the right paradigms. And doesn't, what I've found is being in institutions is institutions shape you. If you're not cognizant of how they're shaping you, you are going to be shaped by that institution, even if you're the best person. It's why we lose so many great members of Congress after 10 years or so. The system breaks down, and they're still going to church. They've still in a small group. They're still great people, but the institution is working on them every single day.
They become cheerleaders for the very agencies they were supposed to be watchdogs over.
And next thing you know, you're at this meeting and you're like, well, you don't think that. Why are you saying that? And that's why we want to pull things into the White House, the administration, because agencies get captured. And I knew it at my agency. I had been thinking about OMB and for a long time. I had done a ton of reading. And I had convictions. I had hypotheses that turned into convictions about how the place should be run. And one of those was that decision about turning on and off the money, that in terms of being a good steward of taxpayer resources, that previously had been done by careers. And really the way that OMB had developed, a policy official, a political appointee, didn't make that call. And we changed that, and they came to me and said, "You're going to ruin the institution. You're going to ruin the institution that you've wanted to work at your whole life." And I said, "No, it won't. It's not going to happen that way." And it didn't happen that way. And next thing you know, we had entire new vistas of accountability. That if we had done that earlier in the administration, we would have been able to know and have much more opportunities to have a President Trump view on the world from a policy perspective.
Yeah, and I think that from the Maria, how do you say it? Bartiromo.
Say that three times.
Bartiromo. From the interview that Trump had with her recently, I thought it was great. He was talking about if he was going to go back in, he's not going to make the same he's not going to be naive. He's going to go in and know what to do immediately.
Well, I mean, and on that note, when regardless of anyone's position, whether it's the speaker's fight or the debt ceiling fight or the fight we just had over the NDAA, anytime you, stand up and kind of raise a fuss over accountability, that's a key word when you're talking about taxpayer dollars. Like, we're stewards of those dollars. You get looked at funny, like you're an alien from Mars or something. It's like, wait a minute, whether you're for or against, let's say the conflict in Ukraine, there still should be, what's the mission statement? What's the end game? I think it's a logical question to ask, is there a path to peace? If so, what does that look like? There's a lot of things you put on the whiteboard, a lot of questions that you want to kind of sketch out to know possible answers to. But then this idea that as Congress, we should just write blank checks on that particular policy item because of freedom and liberty. Look, I'm all about freedom and liberty, but I'm also about accountability. I mean, we got a porous border. We've got fentanyl flooding our streets. We got debt out the wazoo. I mean,
rampant crime.
I got veterans that can't get services. Forgive me, it's okay if you want to paint your cabinets, but if your roof is leaking, I would recommend fixing your roof first. And I think that's where America is as a country. Like, our roof is leaking. And when I mean roof, I mean our border, I mean our veterans, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we can't be the world police anymore. And again, I'm not against those policies, but it's got to be in the right priority, in the right pecking order. But it all gets back to that word, accountability.
Yeah, no question. And I am opposed to those policies. I feel like that's one of those 50-year paradigms in terms of our approach to Europe that we've gotten wrong. And as a result, our entire political class here in D.C. has brainworms when it comes to how to properly assess our interests.
I'm going to work that into an interview, by the way.
Yeah,
I'm going to say brainworms. Well, and just know that I'm referencing this.
There you go. So, I think that's absolutely the case. And, that's one of those things. If you don't recognize properly the world, what you're dealing with, it's not the Soviet Union. It's not. And so the way that we've approached Europe and the world is different in this, and there may be some things that we need to do and others, but that's one of the things that you're going to find in this town is that you always look like an alien. Because I remember coming out of the administration and I was warning against inflation, and everyone looked at me as if, like, inflation is dead. It's never going to happen, ever again. And you're like, have you read an economics book anytime soon?
Right.
And like, this just happens. It's, and lo and behold, that's what happens. And we had 40-year highs of inflation. And so it's just another example of the way these things operate. You need accountability, and you need people that are willing to temporarily look like they are aliens, but they have truth on their side. And the reality is that your voters, your constituents, the communities across the country know what time it is in this country, and they're looking for that. They're looking for that kind of leadership with everything they've got, because they know the urgency. And I think they look at it as a house. Our houses are burning down, and our political class is like measuring the drapes in the second floor. You realize the whole first floor is burning down? That's our communities. That's our schools. Those are our families. That's what we see on social media. Our kids are on TikTok, and you're just fiddling around with, funding some war in Ukraine. Like, what on earth are you thinking? And I think that's exactly what you're saying.
Well, not to get too in the weeds on a policy issue, but I had an amendment to the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, right? It was Lend-Lease, and again, that's very wonky, very nerdy, but simply stated, we give them equipment, and we give it to them on lease terms, so they'll pay us back over time, right? Well, the problem is that as it pertains to Ukraine, there are no terms. So, in other words, the president can just ignore it, and it's a gift. Okay, well, if we're going to gift them the equipment, Congress that's an appropriation, right? And instead, what's happened is we've given that authority, like you said earlier, to the executive branch. I have a job to do. We have a job to do. If we're going to gift Ukraine equipment, then let's have the courage to stand up and say, that tank over there that costs millions and millions of dollars that we're going to do under Lend-Lease, it's actually a gift. Let's just call it a freaking gift. But again, we fleece the American people. Meanwhile, our taxpayer dollars, it's over $40 billion now, has gone to Ukraine. Meanwhile, I got veterans that don't get benefits. I've got illegal aliens coming into the country, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Our priorities are backwards. And again, I think, my record, I've been very outspoken, but then that also means you get a target on your back, as you have a target on your back. So what's that been like? You've left the administration, you've been outspoken on fiscal policy, you've really supported the freedom movement, us, on a number of occasions.
Well, interesting. When I went through the confirmation process, I had the experience of Senator Sanders calling me out for basically believing Orthodox Christianity. Whatever.
Good for you.
Everyone knows they go to a sporting event and they know John 3:16, and that's essentially what I was getting called out in terms of being a bigot for. And so, the interesting thing about that is that once you go through the fire of people calling you the names, they're trying to cancel you. You make it through that, and what are they going to do to you? Yeah. And so the reality is that anytime you're over the target, they're going to call you names. They're going to call you a racist, a bigot, an appeaser, a Christian nationalist. That's their game. That's 150 years of their game. And what we have to do is actually lean in and just say, look, not say your name I'm going to wear, but I don't care that you called me the name. My kids know that I'm not one of those. I don't care if it's on the internet. It's not who I am. We have the moral high ground. Your definition, your assessment of me is not what controls me. And when we have that attitude, which happens to be the same attitude that parents showing up at school boards have with regard to what's being taught in their schools, when we have that, we're going to save the country. Because that is literally what has caused us to have failure for 50, 60 years. And I think that is, honestly a blessing in terms of, Senator Sanders meant it for ill, God meant it for good. And our center is trying to arm those people that have similar opportunities because God's given them an opportunity to be responsible. As I was finishing up at Wheaton College, and I had finished my major, and I was just taking, some classes from good professors, and one of them was on Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And Bonhoeffer said, we can't be, the world's just too far gone for us to be armchair critics. We've got to be responsible is to actually put yourself in the arena and make and go down fighting, which is with all of the decisions and the wisdom that's needed to do that, and come out the other side. You're not always going to be right. You're not always going to have played it the right way, but that's what it means to be afforded an opportunity to stand and be responsible for history as it sits on your shoulders. And that's what we've got to rally our side and thus the nation to be able to recognize the states. And when we have statesmanship like that at your level, at the administration level, at the grassroots level, we're going to find that we can save this country. And I really believe that.
There's a quote that I saw on social media, to your point, a few weeks ago, and it said, in the war of good and evil, if you remain silent, your life might be easier, but your kids won't. And it's all likened to a Dietrich Bonhoeffer quote that says, silence in the face of evil is itself evil. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. God will not hold us guiltless. Yeah. To find out, are we find our identity in one or in the audience of many?
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's, and our founders would have known that duty is ours, results are God's. And then we can sleep well at night. There's no fear. And, you pray for favor and success. But I think what I found is if you courage begets courage. And if you keep leaning in and you find every opportunity to lean forward, there's going to be more and more people that find that attractive. And I think that's what we try to do. I mean, we joke around with you all, like we say, look, we're going to try to push you into oncoming traffic. Yeah. This is an opportunity that's historic.
Do that, No, I'm just kidding.
But we're going to do everything we can to clear that first lane so that no one's getting run over because, when you haven't been here, you don't know the opportunities that exist.
Well, so to speak to that, early on in the year, I remember having conversations. You were excited about the possibilities that this Congress could have, and after the speaker vote and setting things up for the debt ceiling fight, and then now going through appropriations. So I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts about how things ended up with the debt ceiling fight, and then where do you think the appropriation? If you had to give a prediction? What do you think will happen with appropriations?
I'm pretty down on where we are right now with appropriations. I think there's a lot of happy talk, a lot of what I call managing the members from leadership perspective. Leadership has a view. It took me a long time of seeing it up close to understand what they meant by this, but they view fights, they want to manage you all. They want to take you and manage you away from the real fight and put you on the fake fight. And when they can't do that, they find ways to distract you and put you on hamster wheels, where you're just kind of running, but you're not actually impacting anything. And that's where I think we are on the appropriations fight. And it's a reason because I was very, very excited about what was accomplished in the speaker's fight. I thought it was transformative because you had, for the first time, House conservatives exercising unilateral power as a coalitional partner. No longer backbenchers, a coalitional partner. And that was ripped up in the debt limit deal, really without folks knowing about it, but that was an assumption the speaker made. And he decided, I'm going to rule in majority with Hakeem Jeffries. And that balance has not been restored. And so that fundamental gap still exists that I don't think has been addressed. And so, yes, on a bill-by-bill basis, there's been great work on the House conservatives to say, look, that's the path you chose, so your life just got a lot more complicated, and you all have been voting against rules and things like that, which is fantastic. That's what he gets for that. But I'm not as excited that a House-passed bill that goes to the Senate will actually become what becomes law, because you don't have that ability at Rules Committee to be able to say, no, we're going to send it back to the negotiating table. So I think there's a lot that you all are doing. The last week's was a great set of events with regard to the amendments passed in the NDAA. I think the potential is still there to have a really meaningful fight, but I think you're going to have to really kind of rip off the Band-Aid and say to the appropriators, this notion that you're going to just draw down all of these prior Biden accounts called rescissions and count those as your cuts, that's not cutting a bureaucracy. That's funding, that's cutting programs that were literally plussed up so that they could be dropped down. That's how this town works. They think ahead like that. And so I think we're at this critical moment where you all are trying to get your mind wrapped around how to address that. And I think that's really important because otherwise you're going to go out and tell your constituents, this is this big fight, we're headed towards a shutdown. I'm not in the business of telling constituents, and you're not my constituents, the grassroots people that we work with, this is a real fight, like the McCarthy fight, like the debt limit fight. If it's not, and it won't be because you guys aren't, it'll be because Kevin McCarthy knows at the end, I'm going to use cartel votes to get this across the finish line. And if we don't fix that, we're going to be on a hamster wheel, and I think that's what we got to figure out how to get the cartel off of that.
So do you think we end up going to doing an omni or?
Well, he said today, we're not doing an omnibus bill, and I replied, yeah, that's because you intend to do 3 omnibus bills.
So one, I've heard this before, one in September.
Timing could be many different options, but the basic point is, okay, you don't want a big 1,500-page bill. I'll give you 3 500-page bills.
Okay.
But all of those, the point was not necessarily, we want a different way of the United States Congress to actually make decisions on behalf of the people, and that is to have a debate about an agency and to really get into the weeds about that agency and who are the people that need to be defunded. And you're not going to get into that with regard to this big omnibus bill. So I think we're at this moment where a lot of things could go well and a lot of things could go poorly. And, you wanted my honest assessment.
Well, and I agree. I mean, when you look at Limit, Save, Grow, which wasn't perfect, but it was a great piece of legislation. And what we ended up with was the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which I call the Fiscal Irresponsibility Act, because like you said, a lot of the quote unquote savings are projected. They're not realized immediately. It's over a 10-year period, and that's only if appropriators hit certain marks, which only are suggestions. And so anytime you're trusting government math for future savings, I'm incredibly skeptical. And that was the beauty of Limit, Save, Grow, is that you captured a lot of that savings on the front end.
Yeah.
So the American taxpayer was guaranteed that if we're going to save, pick a number, whether it's $100 million or 800 million or whatever, or billions or whatever, that it was a real number. Right now we're dealing with monopoly money and Common Core math. I mean, it's all fiction.
Right. Your House passed bill had a 20% cut to the bureaucracy. Right. And to be able to fund veterans and other things that you care about, infrastructure, that meant the Department of Education was going to get a 30% cut.
That's right.
And that's what you're talking about, that upfront savings, which was then you bank it in over 10 years and you have a game changer bill.
So what advice do you have for us? We're freshmen. We're just trying to figure things out.
My view would be to have great skepticism with regard to anything that leadership is asking you to do. I always had the approach, if leadership wants us to do that, we should take the exact opposite position. And I may not have all the facts at the given moment, but I know you're wrong. And the only time that's ever changed is in the aftermath for a few months after the speakers fight. And that changed. And I used to tell people, now we're a little bit in a New Testament world. Yeah. Because you're actually exercising power. So if you say it needs to be different, it will be different. We're now back in Old Testament world.
We're drifting that way.
And so I would say you've got to know that they are a cartel. And the cartel only cares about political stability. They're trying to minimize political risk. They are not in the business of accomplishing policy objectives. They literally don't care
about the policy.
They don't care. And I think that's what's really hard medicine for people who come here. And not necessarily you guys, but the people who kind of go to the polls electing Republicans and they're like, yeah, we got a new majority. They don't understand that there's really two types of members. There's just happy to be here caucus, and then there's the fighters that are like, I came to change the country, and then I'll try to pick the level of political risk that will allow me to get my policy objectives and get everyone making it politically successful. But there's risk involved. We're not going to save the country without risk.
And those of us fighters, we end up finding that we annoy the ones that just want to be here.
Right, yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to get a little bit less serious and ask some funny questions. So, okay, what do you love to do? If you were to Netflix something or watch something, what's the series?
It would be some kind of history. I love Gladiator. I love Braveheart. I love those kinds of things. I love to read. I love to follow sports. I'm as woke as they are. I'm a huge Yankees fan and NFL Giants fan, and so I love sports and I love hanging out with my girls. And so that fills my tank. If I'm reading, it's never worked for me, but it is what most interests me for sure.
You got two sweet girls that are off camera.
We haven't heard them break in yet.
but yeah, those love your life.
Oh, absolutely. 9 and 11 years old, and so much fun. And
what are their names, Russ?
Ella and Porter. So
awesome.
One's a Shire, and the other one's a firecracker.
The youngest one's the firecracker.
Oh yeah, no doubt about it.
That's how it usually is.
But before you land the plane totally, I want to throw a name out. Jonathan Jakubowski from Ohio. I know is a good friend of yours. He's a friend of Eric and I's. And I think you probably know Jonathan too. But the first time really that Eric and I had ever been with each other was a couple of years ago in the Trump Hotel. We're having a conversation, not political, faith-based, and Jonathan was involved in that. And then, soon after, I think both Eric and I got up here. He's like, "You gotta get talking to Russ. You gotta get talking to Russ." So,
well, I went out there, and he's involved with a group called The Forge, and I gave a speech and got to know him. And thankfully, I didn't intend for this, but I spoke before him because you don't want to speak after Jonathan.
You do not.
The guy's got
talented.
founding father level talent.
He is talent.
And so, but he's a great man of faith. It's been fun to get to know him, and you guys through him.
No, we started a Bible study that we're involved with, and I get to stay up to speed. In fact, today on the plane, I'm reading about an organization he's leaning in on or a mission to try to stop in Ohio what's become a front-load mission of the left to try to bring abortion back in on these state-level ballot initiatives. And Jonathan is rolling up his sleeves and trying to be a leader like he is in his state. There's only 18 states that allow you to amend your constitution, your state constitution, and Oklahoma sadly is one of them. And so for those of you that have connections in Ohio, hopefully you can change. From my understanding, he's involved with the initiative to say, if you want a ballot initiative, great, but increase the threshold. Yeah. So many of the bad things that the left is advocating, and they're trying to do it through these ballot initiatives. And 60-vote threshold, I think, is what they're trying to do in Ohio to try to stop, trying to bring in Ohio from a pro-life status to pro-abortion.
Yeah, they got two big votes: the August vote, which is on that change, and then in the fall on the actual ballot initiative. So hopefully the former helps them achieve greater. And it's really ground zero for the life debate.
Yep.
And Ohio obviously has turned very much more red in the last 15 years, and so the left is obviously smart and always ahead of the game.
So for you Oklahomans out there, lean in on your state lawmakers to get our state constitutional amendments process changed to where these ballot initiatives can't wreak the havoc that they're doing. Pretty sad. Are you guys like that, where you can amend your state constitution by ballot initiative? You guys in Tennessee that way?
A lot of
We have a
billionaires.
protracted process in Tennessee. It's got to be passed twice by the General Assembly. It's hard to change the Tennessee Constitution, but there is a process.
Republic. We're a republic. We're not a democracy, and that's where so many people say, we're a republic." Right. And when 18 states can change their state constitutions,
That's in Missouri. We have all this money coming in from out of state to change our constitution, and it's awful.
And it's also not necessarily something like I was actually reading an American Conservative about the progression of the marijuana laws in Oklahoma.
Yes,
which is something that gets passed in one generation, and then you see the fruits of it. And the reason we have these checks and balances in our system that take things a lot longer is so that you can figure out, oh man, maybe that's not a good idea.
You bet.
So that absolutely the importance of some of these correctives that would protect the ability of people to have some wisdom over time.
Well, Russ, thanks for being a fighter. Thanks for Center for Renewing America. How can people follow you?
I'm pretty active on Twitter, so they can find me at Russ Vought. The center is AmericaRenewing.com, and we really are putting out a ton of stuff, even things that are not necessarily the fight of the day. Big tech, trying to have an entirely different view on foreign policy. And our view is that we've got to change these big paradigms, and once we do, a lot of things can fall into place like clockwork. But you've got to have a fearlessness and a worldview that allows you to go where the truth is, and that's what we're trying to do.
Well, thanks for working with us, lowly freshmen.
Yeah.
Nothing like you guys are the freedom fighters, so I appreciate it.
Thanks, man. Thanks for jumping in with us.
Absolutely.
Thank you. That's all we have for this week's episode. Again, thank you, Russ, for joining us. And if you like this show, please subscribe, please share it, and encourage other people to subscribe as well. Also, send us a question if you'd like us to read a question on air. Until then, we'll see you the next time on the Fresh Freedom Podcast.